I feel designers are the one who always want to wear the always keep on wanting to wear the designer hat. Like, my design, this is what my work is, this is how we will show, and all of those things. So I have a thing about this. I say, designers with wearing that kind of hat is always in this mode of like showing and impressing. I think my process most of the times has been to kind of run away from that mentality. And I feel like there is a difference between this show and impress mentality and the mentality I usually try to go with, but I'm also a human being, so I kind of fall into the cracks sometimes, which is the share and discuss mentality.
Hey friends, welcome to Product Stories, the podcast that delves into the minds of product and design folks to talk about their stories, challenges, and work. My name is Kaushik, and in each episode, I talk to my guests to find out how they work, the process they follow, learn about new tools, and understand the breakthroughs they have had in their career. This week, our guest is Debashish Paul, who's currently at Twitter, and he previously worked in Facebook, or now known as Meta, where he invented several systems and interfaces with over 60 patents to his name. We are going to dive into his journey as a designer in solving problems, his experience with working with some of the biggest tech companies in the world, and the process he follows. So sit back and relax, make a cup of tea or coffee, and enjoy the episode. Hey Debashish, welcome to Product Stories. I'm so happy to have you here. It's been quite some time since we had our first conversation about doing this, and I'm so glad you took your time out on a Sunday night and you're having this conversation here with me. Thank you so much.
Oh, great, man. I'm happy that finally we are able to connect. Sunday nights, yeah, Monday morning there, so time doesn't really matter. But yeah, it's been like 2 weeks of almost vacations for me, so it was a light evening. So I thought I'll just like end the year with this talk with you.
Great. I'm so glad we're doing this finally. Anyways, Debashish, I would love it if you could introduce yourself and yeah, why don't you go
Yeah,
ahead?
sure. Yeah, I'm Debashish Paul. I go by Dev. I'm a product designer at Twitter. I was at Facebook for a long time before joining Twitter, which I did just 6 months ago. I've been a product designer for almost 11 years now, but I kind of started back in India in Adobe as an engineer, but then I kind of transitioned into being a designer, and I've been loving it. And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm originally from Calcutta, India, and I lived in Bangalore for some time, working for Adobe and Yahoo. And yeah, that's been, I think, my resume. Talking about where I've been and what I've been doing. But yeah, that's who I am. A designer, love to design and solve problems.
Yeah, that's a very nice intro about yourself. I remember the first time I came across you, it was I think in one of the Twitter spaces where
Huh.
I remember the way you spoke, the way you explained a particular problem and answered it. I was just mind blown by the amount of clarity you had, and I was just like,
What was
I
it? Which
it
which
it
what
was
topic
actually
was it?
quite some time ago. It was during the
Okay.
whole second wave which was happening in India,
Oh,
and
I see. I see. Okay.
and I think Twitter Spaces had just launched then, and
Hmm. Hmm, hmm.
every other day there used to be like Twitter Spaces.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I remember there was one Twitter Space happening, and you just came in and you explained it in such a nice manner that I was like, I need to get Devashish on the podcast no matter what. So
Nice, man. Glad it was clear enough. Yeah, it's been. I really appreciate people who talk about problems very clearly, because I think that is where everything boils down. Like, you
yeah,
start the framing very clearly, and then everything becomes or seems easier, I guess, because you have that clarity. So I try
yeah.
to be clear in most of the times when I'm talking about things or explaining things. I'm so glad that you still remember it. So I kind of feel it was clear enough so that you remember even now. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting because the toughest, I mean, the toughest projects I had to work on is when the
Mm,
problem was not clear. Like, the problem
exactly.
statement was never clear. Or we
Exactly.
didn't know what we actually wanted to achieve through the design. So that's I think
Yeah.
a very important quality to have for a designer as well, to understand and
Yeah.
explain the problem statement in a manner which is clear, which can be understood by anyone.
Yeah. 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 And that takes time, right? I mean, uh, design is such a thing, which is like but people talk about problem solving as design, which is what it is. But most of the times, everyone is a problem solver in a team, right? Like an engineer is a problem solver, a product
Yeah.
manager is a problem solver, you are a problem solver being a designer. And I feel like we all bring our own expertise on the table to solve the same problem. But I think the idea of understanding the fact that you as a designer are responsible for find the most elegant solution, delightful, all these buzzwords, right? Like delightful, elegant, and empathetic and all that. But I think what it boils down to is simplicity, right? Like it's that thing. Like the moment you make something as simple as just you get it, you show it to anyone who has not worked on that problem and they see the solution, they just get it, like how to use it. That is simplicity. And that is where all the adjectives come and fall in place. It's a convergence of all that adjectives of like beautiful, sundar, sushil, and all of these like other objectives of delightfulness, playful, and all that. They all come and converge when the thing is simple, right? So that's what takes time over the years. You just practice that. You don't practice your you don't practice your pixel pushing, you don't practice your you know knowledge of colors or typography over the years. You just like learn that as a skill, and when you practice more of these domains, you're basically practicing how do you create simplicity by using those skills that you have acquired over the years in these specific domains. So so yeah, simplicity is the keyword.
Yeah, talking on the same lines, right? When I was talking about like how you were explaining about simplicity and how you try to explain something in a very simple manner, I was also thinking on the same lines that something like communication for a designer is so important, right? And
Yeah.
even the part about storytelling, because I remember from our conversation, like, the first conversation which we had, where you spoke about how storytelling plays a huge role in being a designer,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how you can use this to, like, um, basically explain the problem that you're trying to solve to people, and all these things, right? It's very
Yeah.
fascinating because that's something I never heard before. And
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember it, if you could
Yeah, yeah. No,
probably
no. I
talk a bit about
remember.
it.
I remember. Yeah, I remember, and that is something that I really like stand by. And since I talk about it to anyone, even I kind of try to imbibe that in my like work life as well when I'm working with other designers, PMs, and engineers. I think one thing that I really have, I think, learned over the years that, and also that's also because of the nature of work I do, um, and I'll come to that a little later. But I think the idea of articulating things in a very very I would okay in that case the simplicity boils down like what is a common language, right? Like a lot of times we become you know I would say we become slaves to the kind of jargons that we are kind of processing in our own professions, right? I mean, the Twitter noise, the podcast noise, and everything. Everyone is talking about things, right? And as young designers, you come in the industry and start thinking about what to catch. What are the things that align with your thinking and your beliefs? So you start you know aligning with the thought process of that person or that source or whatever that is, right? And that is where things go a little haywire, or they can also become better for you. But the thing is, you have to understand what is a source and where do I really need to put my energies in, right? So what happens like when you really clarify a problem, or storytelling, coming back to what you're saying, right? Storytelling, I think the way people think about storytelling is like as elaborate as possible. So okay, let me reverse that order a little bit. I feel like storytelling as a concept is important, of course, but I think the ability to figure out that one message that you want to land is the most important part, right? And different type of stories could be your vehicles to launch that message, right? Depending on what kind of audience you're speaking with, what kind of place or what kind of context that you're dealing with that problem at, right? So so storytelling really boils down to, like, this your ability to figure out which mode of story should I choose in order to land that one message that you want to land, right? So that way, if you think about it, like, you can't talk about the same thing in the same way, to a person who is your stakeholder versus to a person who might be your VC, right? Like, it's like it's totally different. So that ability is the ability that you need to build, and overall it becomes like, oh, you are a great storyteller because you know what story to tell to whom, in order to land that message that you have in your mind, right? Or that you want to land.
Yeah, very interesting. Just the whole concept and how you explain it again and how you articulate it, right? Um, but yeah, let
Yeah.
me.
So no, I will actually come back to, I said that I will talk about the why it is so and why I give it so much importance is because the nature of my work has been, dealing with mostly ambiguous problems most of the times which did not have ongoing products, right? I mean, just identifying a problem and figuring out that this problem needs to be solved for the users, and how does that problem translate into an opportunity or a business opportunity for the company that or the team that I'm working for, right? And mixing or aligning these things together, is kind of super important, not from like the mocks I design or prototypes I do, but the way I communicate and how do I basically ensure that my peers or my leaders or my managers, or the entire team understands that this is a problem worth solving, and why should we even solve it, and how do we solve it comes in later. Like, this whole why thing in the beginning is very important. To communicate the why, you need to basically figure out how do we make sure this thing becomes a shared goal for all of us, so that we all work on this together to build this thing together, right? So last few years, or I would say, more than a little, 4 or 5 years, I've been into, you know, problem spaces or projects that are of that nature that required me to kind of, and I initially failed a lot because my initial thing was like, oh, I create this cool prototype, I talk about it, I show it to people, and that's how, like, that's how it will work. But most of the times, only the designers would get, excited about it, or the engineers, one of the engineers might like, oh, this is so cool, but landing that overall message from, like, for all the stakeholders, um, did not require a prototype, but the framing and the reasoning for why we want to do it, and like how can we do it together and all of that. So I think, yeah, that is why, I just like did more of a trial and error myself. Just followed a lot of mentors or people I really appreciate, or really love to hear from, and see how they put things together. What are they basically spending their energies and time into in terms of talking about it, and then translate that into my own context, my own problem space, and then talking about it in a way that started landing well. Like, okay, this is how it works well, so let's do it this way.
Great. So, on the same lines, since you're talking about problem solving and all these things, you have worked both at Facebook and Twitter, something which is used by so many users across the world, right? So
Yeah.
I'll probably start it off with in a simple manner. It's like, what is it actually like to work in such a huge company, with such a huge team, and at the same time, so many users who are using your product.
Yeah.
With every little change you make, there is like a series of change of events which happen, right? So
Yeah.
what was it like to work in that kind of space? Is what I want to understand. I have a few more questions. I'll follow up with that.
Yeah, sure, sure, sure. Yeah, I think one thing that I started learning completely in a new way after Facebook started growing, right? Like when I joined, Facebook was comparatively small than what it is today, but this whole layer of scale, what scale does to any problem, any idea, any solution, that was really something new for me. And just like I know that I wouldn't have experienced that or learned it being in another setup. So that was definitely one thing. Um, and that scale comes from the number of users, who are using it, different countries, different cultures, different, cohorts of people using it, and they have different types of problems, and not every problem is solved by a single team or a single, a designer, right? Like there are different types of buckets in the company, and just to kind of understand how the uh, you know machine actually works inside, right? I mean, how do you actually see these different parts? Okay, an entire team is taking care of something like privacy and safety, which you would not feel as a product team, but how they are translating their thoughts and their work into all the nooks and corners of the product. It was very fascinating to understand and see how that part of the world works. um, Research, right? Like before Facebook, I think I'd never used or I'd never worked with researchers as closely as I did at Facebook, and then in the following years, I feel the amount of insights you can generate, like because most of these products are like uh, they deal with human emotions, right? Like they are not productivity tools. They are not like point A to point B and it's a task that I need to complete, right? Most of these things are like, oh, this person is not liking my photos, so I don't want to post on Facebook. Like, how do you solve that problem? Or, how do you create um, more of like this psychological cushioning with the product that you're designing, which people actually feel like sharing more and like talking to each other more or have conversations more. So these are very different type of problems which I only started learning after being in a setup like Facebook or even like now with Twitter. It's like, yeah, it's a a very different set of problems that you will not be able to really understand by not working in these places. So that was definitely my you know moment of like eureka moment, I would say. Like, oh, I did not know they can actually um, design products to do these kind of things, right? I mean, that was a big deal for me in terms of how scale and how just like solving for human emotions became so much of a center of the work that I was doing.
That's very interesting. And something which I would like to understand is like, what was this transition really like? And this transition is not just like, at first I actually, the like first thought was like, what was it like, transitioning from being at Yahoo and Adobe to like, moving to Facebook? It's completely
Hmm.
different domains, everything, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I felt you might have gone through the whole transition where I think you stayed in Facebook for quite some time, which was like I think 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the
Yeah.
transition in like what it was like in first year of Facebook to probably what it was like in
Mm.
fifth or sixth. I'm sure that itself was different, right? So what was
Yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah.
How was this entire thing, and
Yeah, I
what was
mean,
it
I'm
like for
glad
you?
you, yeah, definitely. I'm glad you asked that question because, it was definitely a, you know, very interesting and fascinating journey for me, those 7 years, right? I mean, it was in itself a piece of my career that I feel I belong to more than, what I did before that, right? Um, I think I was fortunate enough to have the chance to keep moving teams and problem spaces. I would not say people who don't do that are not fortunate. It's just that I got to experience different types of teams and different types of problem spaces, which I feel did not make me realize that I spent 7 years there. It's like it was more of like everything was new, and I think the most amount of time I spent was 2 years, or I would say 25 months in one team, which was a stories team. But apart from that, I just kept moving around. Like 1 year or just like a little more than 1 year, I would be in another team. And most of the times, just two times aside, most of the times these changes were just because of the kind of work I was, doing, and because it was, I was just like asked to kind of, oh, can you uh, become the founding designer of this team versus that team, right? Like, you're the first designer of this team. We want to do something experimental, and why don't you kind of start working on this, and then we'll hire more people and all of that. So that kept happening, and that kept my interest. Like, I was motivated enough to kind of work on those problem areas or product streams that I helped unlock or create. So that was definitely a reason for uh, me to maybe stay for such a long time. Um, but also, like you said, transition, right? I think my first 3 years or 4 years were proper like product work, like real product work, until I left the stories team. Um, it was like really working on a product stream that is there, and kind of either solving an existing problem that is there, or just identifying problems that are there, and like working with stakeholders. So, and after that, it was more like, oh, we don't have a product, but we have this like research with us that says that maybe unlocking this new thing within Facebook will create value for people or value for the company, and let's figure out. And then that is the kind of I started doing, where like identifying an opportunity and presenting it in front of like the leadership at a very high level, and just getting a understanding of like whether we should do it or not do it, right? Like that kind of stuff, right? And out of that, most of the stuff like, oh, we should do it, or some of the stuff like we should not do it, they're all like valuable for the company. But it was like the mix of the work that I was doing was like very ambiguous space, but had to work very closely with research, and like had to do a lot of my own research, understand like how do I pitch these things to different types of people. So that transition was definitely something that will really be helpful for rest of my life, I guess, as long as I work. But when I started, I joined the ads team working on a product called Ads Manager, and I think within a year I moved into a new team that also started becoming true, because I was starting to participate in hackathons, and starting to uh, come up with these new things that I wanted to kind of always work on. And luckily, some of the work that I did, you know, got a lot of appreciation. They became products by themselves, and some of the patent streams started coming in. We're like, oh, this thing is unique. Like, why don't we patent it? And you're gonna file a patent and make a product. So it was all happening. We're like, oh, this is a new thing that you came up with, so why don't you use your next 6 weeks and come up with a proposal for this product, whatever that could be. And I would kind of spend the next 6 weeks coming up with the proposal itself. And like in the same process, I'll also talk to the the parent teams, and they will say that, oh, this is great, like this, let's go ahead and patent it. They'll file a patent and all of that. So that this mix of whatever I just said kept going on for like many years. And I think I, as an individual, as a designer, there was a huge delta in the you know in my own personality, the way when I joined Facebook versus when I left Facebook. Like, it was, I would say, if I had, let's say, spent 7 years in another company, maybe that magnitude would have been lesser. But I would say that transition was really amazing in terms of my head, my head space. I never thought it will be that big of a transition. But I think also it was also like about understanding where the real problem is, and understanding who what do I really want to do. Sometimes it was like, oh, if I do this, maybe I'll not get the bonus that I should be eyeing for. I'll not get the promotion that I should be eyeing for. But I honestly did not care about those things in that period of time, where like I really want to do this, and there's an opportunity for me to learn and like if do or solve this problem, so I'll go ahead and do it regardless of what the outcome of that is. And thankfully, I was not doing it in the air. There was a team that was like executing on that along with me, and like we were able to ship things and do things, learn about new things, and is pretty fascinating that way.
Yeah. So, one of the things which I really want to kind of go back and talk to you about is like, um, of all the things which you mentioned, right? One of the things which stood out for me is that you usually worked on. Correct me if I'm wrong. You usually worked on
Yeah,
new kind of problems, or I'm sorry, new products or like new solutions altogether, which is like something which probably did not exist before, or something on those
yeah,
lines. Am I right? Yeah, and
yeah.
that's how the whole patent thing and all those things happen.
Hmm.
I'll come back to that later, but this whole thing, right, about solving for these problems which are completely new. What is that
Yeah,
like? Um,
yeah.
because I feel like that's something I've never been able, I mean, never had the opportunity to work on something like that. Because like, I'm
Hmm.
currently working with a neobank plus a crypto, this thing and all
Yeah,
that. But still somewhere or the other, there is at least like one product which is doing a similar thing, or and we look at their solution and we try to create a solution of our own, and bunch of these things, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
how do you approach a problem in a scenario where you have no context to go back to?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's something I would want to understand.
Yeah, like I said in the previous part of the conversation, where like there's a message and there are like different story vehicles or different formats of stories you can like take and land it. From the very beginning of my career, or even like as a person, like I'm a very generative person, right? Like I just love to come up with 20 different ideas to one thing. And I think over the years, like I was like that when I was in my early 20s when I started my career. And even now I'm like that. But what really has changed is like the ability to understand out of those 20 ideas, what are the two most promising ideas that I need to talk to people about and not confuse them with 20 ideas, right? Like that is the thing. The whole nature of understanding what to let go and what not to kind of hold on to, and that process is very important to kind of um, go through multiple times, because that builds your self-awareness as a designer, where like you really can't hold on to an idea, right? It's not. So if you approach the whole thing with like my idea, your idea, their idea, it's not going to work. It is the problem, right? The problem is at the core of it, and that needs to be solved. And if you can come up with one idea and your colleague might come up with another idea, your ability should be to see the opportunity. How do I merge those ideas to create the solution that is there, versus like my idea versus your idea? And I've seen that a lot of conversations fall into the crack because of that kind of an approach. And I'd actually like to bring up a point here, which is over the years, and I was also like that before, I think designers are in that mix of like PM, research, engineering and design, and a couple of other uh, functions that work on solving this problem together. I feel designers are the one who always want to wear the like always keep on wanting to wear the designer hat. Like, my design, this is what my work is, this is how we will show, and all of those things. So I have a thing about this. I say, designers with wearing that kind of hat is always in this mode of like showing and impressing, right? Like show and impress. Everything is a presentation for them. Everything goes into like, oh, I need to finish this deck, and that slide is not looking good, and that mock has that inconsistency and all of that. And you will come across a lot of designers like, oh, my stuff is not ready yet, right? And I will show you later, like PM is asking like, hey, can I see something? Like, oh, I can share with you in a couple of days because it's not ready yet. And honestly, most of the time that ready yet is nothing but that finish, that polish, and you just want to keep doing it so that you impress them. And I think that is also a part of that insecurity, where like every time you're showing a mock, you feel that people are judging you as a designer, right? It's like, oh, people will think that I'm not good at my work, or I'm not a good designer just because this mock does not look finished. And I think my process most of the times has been to kind of run away from that mentality, which is which I used to do earlier, and I used to kind of see the failures and the heartbreaks and the amount of time I spend, and then it just not does not land, and you come back and like, oh, this is not working and all of that. And I feel like there is a difference between this show and impress mentality and the mentality I usually try to go with, but I'm also a human being, so I kind of fall into the crack sometimes, which is the share and discuss mentality. And I feel like there is a very interesting distinction between sharing and presenting, right? So every time you talk about something or show your work, it does not have to be a presentation. It can be a sharing session, right? And when it is a sharing session, you kind of have a different kind of mentality towards it. You work as a collaborator, right? Like designers miss the point of thinking most of the time that I'm also a collaborator first, and then I kind of I become a designer to kind of go back to my desk and kind of solve something, come back and understand the team's thing. So yeah, my process most of the time has been like collaborative in nature, in terms of understanding with what my researcher is trying to say, what my data scientist is wanting to say, with the kind of amount of knowledge they have about a problem. And then I gel very well with my engineers most of the time, because uh, my understanding of like how things work from the past in my career. So that helps me understand like where, how much is it feasible. And these are the people I can actually crack some of the wackiest ideas in front of, and they'll be like, oh cool dude, I think we can do it, or I don't think it can be done here, otherwise it can be done. And so there's so many conversations that kind of crop up from there. And then I kind of come back to my own like mode in my desk, or like taking a walk or taking down notes, which is where I start thinking about um what could be the exploratory phase of this. Well, how do we kind of, so I have these three phases that I actually usually go through, and kind of trying to elaborate that a little bit here. And go through this whole explorer mode, which I call the telescope mode, which is like, oh, the horizon is open, I want to see what are the things that are, sorry, there was a pop-up here, what are the things that are really possible, right? And then just like blue sky, that is where my generative uh, personality comes into picture. I might think of some of the wackiest ideas, or some of the coolest ideas, some of the simplest ideas, right? Like what is the mix of these things. And then each for each idea or each solution, start to, I would say, the the scalar mode, or I actually call it the binoculars, which is like the context, right? So you understand the context, you understand like what is this idea or the solution going to bring to the world, what are the good things, what are the bad things, how can this be misused, or what will my mom sitting in India think about this feature if I kind of built it this way. um, and then comes the optimizer phase for if my idea has passed these two phases, then comes the optimizer phase, where like I try to then think about like, oh, what will be the cool UI mechanic that I will use to translate this thinking into a product, right? And that is where like I can choose between going high fidelity to low fidelity, depending on who my audience is at this point in time. If I need to show it to just some of my engineers to kind of get my early signals, I will not bother about like what the finesse of that thing is, right? I just like show them some cool animation, just like some physics stuff, and just how the sheet could come in, what could this sheet have, what are the wave animation looking like, that kind of stuff, and not worry about anything else. So yeah, and then like you saw these three, and the last optimizer phase is where I call the magnifying glass. So if you see, these are the three lenses I try to use for everything that I do. So that way I've felt that in a journey of the product solution space, if there are, let's say, 8 to 10 nodes, each node has some sort of like service that this product would offer. It could be a service that makes you happy, it is a service that gives you feedback, it is a service that is basically asking for an input from you, and all of that goes through these three phases. And I feel like after each node goes through these phases, the solution structure is usually something that people understand, and it feels like a robust one. And yeah, I mean, most of those projects have gone through that kind of process, at least in my head. And then comes in front of people that I present to.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how much I relate to the, the show and impress part which you were talking about, because
Uh-huh.
because I think that's kind of how I approached design for, like, at least the first year of my career. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
still, like, only in the second year, but still, that's
Yeah.
that's that's kind of how I approached it, and it's just hilarious how much I can relate to every single point of it. But this whole idea or approach of, like, share and converse or share and collaborate, I think
Mm.
that's probably going to be my biggest takeaway from this interaction, because
Ah.
that just blew my mind, because now, since, like, we are back in office, we are doing that, the whole collaborating thing a lot more, at least
Mm-hmm.
at Onjuno. And I mean, that's like a important thing for me, something which I would like to keep in the back of my head at all points of time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can actually, confirm on that fact by just going to your PM and asking him, hey, like, I mean, how do you want me to work with you? What will make me the most helpful person for you? And he will not say that come up with the most amazing designs. He will say that, hey, let's work on this together, like, work on, let me figure out this, and if you can help me with that. I think that's what most of the time they are looking for. Your partners are looking for that. You are a collaborator, and your expertise is design. So you basically understand the common problem and kind of bring back pieces that they can swallow and digest, right? Most of the times what happens is, if you bring this like finished thing in front of them, they get overwhelmed and they are not able to give the right feedback that they would want to give you. And ultimately, in the process, the work, the product, the sentiments, the energies are kind of getting wasted if you think so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, and it's very, very relatable, the way you put it across,
Yeah.
especially. But yeah, let's come back to, your
Yeah.
uh, work again, and something which I mentioned that I'll come back to later was, like, your patents. And man, you have so many of them. So so let me, like,
Yeah.
first ask you with, like, how did the first one start, and what
Yeah.
is usually the process involved in, like, getting a patent done? What kind of timelines
Yeah.
are involved and all these things? What's like basically the behind the scenes of, like,
Yeah.
creating a patent? And when do you know that you should create a particular patent? So that's also one
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. I think that, yeah, I get that question a lot. Honestly, the process is very subjective to the organization you are in, the company, the philosophy towards patenting something. Um, and when I was back in Adobe, even back then, there was a very healthy culture of filing patents, right? Like, even I had filed patents back at Adobe, but none of them got grants. Of course, like, they were not like awarded the patents. They were like filed by the company, by the internal team, but they never converted into real patents. So I kind of understood or knew how things are usually taken in a process of patenting when you're working at an organization. So at Facebook, it's very interesting a story. I'd like to tell that story here, which is, so when I said, I was in the ads team when I first started, and Facebook was very small back then. I was actually, I think the 100th or 102nd designer within the company, and now they are like very, I think, close to 4,000. So it's a very, very huge jump from the days that I had experience back then. But working on the ads product was really you know very fascinating for me, for one reason, I would say, because before that my background was also in like just consumer products. And I felt like the difference between, or I would say, one ability that you need to really, really have as a designer to design an enterprise product or ads kind of tools and all that, is empathy, right? You really can't make anything out of your own, because you're not using that product yourself, right? Like, there's no understanding that you have that you can bring. So it's always going to be like, talking to people, translating their needs into what you really want to build. And that was something really, really fascinating. But I think my inner self was also craving to kind of do some of this, like, ideas that I had around video and audio and all of that stuff. So I actually was talking to one of my, like, back in the time, friend and colleague, and I was telling him, like, I was so new at Facebook, like I was telling him that, hey Jason, I want to understand, how do you do, like, I have this idea, but this idea is not at all related to the team that I am in, or we are in. How do you think I can you know work on this? And he gave me this very simple idea, saying that, hey, why don't you participate in the hackathon that is coming up? And every quarter there's a hackathon. There used to be a hackathon back in the days, and the perk was, if you if you win the hackathon, or if you're in the top 3 or top 6, I think top 3 back then, yeah, top 3 of the hackathon, you get to meet Mark Zuckerberg. And, like, he will basically, you can present in front of him what was your hack and all of that. That was definitely an added perk, that I was like, oh, I mean, it's been just 7 months in the company, and I don't know if this works out. So I really did not have the expectation of even qualifying through the first round, but I just, like, submitted a keynote prototype. And yeah, Jason told me that you can just submit any prototype, but you don't have to be an engineer to build this thing and hack the stuff and all of that. You can be just a designer. You can also partner with a designer, but if sorry, engineer, if you want to, but you don't need to. And I just, like, created this keynote prototype of this one thing that I so much believed in. And I presented, I was just submitted it, and out of I think 180 or 130 hacks, I actually came in the top 30. And top 30 had to present in front of an audience, and I did that. And that is when you would actually be chosen for the top 3. And that's many years ago, but I actually won that hackathon. My idea was, like, my belief was, when you react to any item in the feed, it's a photo, it's a video, it's a text, or anything, it's this one reaction that you give, and which is good for static content. But when it comes to timeline based media, it is actually not working. Is there a solution for people to express their reactions in different parts of the video? And that was the prototype I made, and how you can use the data um, on that video from multiple people, and create ways in which you can actually tell people which was the most interesting part of the video, right? The heat map. And that was the hack, and I presented that, and I actually won that. I went and met Mark Zuckerberg and presented it. It became a part of the product as well. um, so if you see the reactions and the heat map that started coming in many years ago, now it's a norm across the industry. Started somewhere there, I would say. And in that audience is where one of these, like, patent councils were there. They reached out to me themselves, saying that, hey, it was a pretty cool idea, why don't we talk about potentially patenting it? And this is 2015 when I first filed my first patent, with the help of the patent lawyers. And I actually did not have to do anything. I just had to submit a prototype, and they wrote everything that they had to, and it was filed. And that particular patent actually took almost 4 years to get a grant, which I never thought we'll get a grant. But in 2019, I got the grant for that, that whole system of, like, reacting to uh, videos or portions of the videos in social media platforms. So that's where it started. But yeah, after that, the same process kind of just kept going on for stuff that I did on stories. And stories was like a pretty new product. And I also did, like, stuff on audio. Audio rooms are now so much popular, with Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. We actually launched a product called Facebook Audio Live back in the days, which was again my second hackathon, which I actually won. And I kind of hold 2 patents on that as well today. But yeah, that's where it all started. But then after that, it became you build the relationship with the patent council, and they understand that where you're coming from, the way you present things, the way you think of the problems and solutions. They found it to be worthy enough to be filed as patents, because honestly, I mean, I don't own the um, patents myself. I can call myself the inventor of it, but my company, who I worked for back then, they own the patents. So that's how it works. But yeah, I mean, over the years, I filed almost, I think, close to 130 patents, and so far I've got 60 grants altogether.
It's kind of amazing how I know exactly the feature you're talking about,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah,
it's it's kind of amazing, and I'm so I mean, like, you have met Mark Zuckerberg, which is like amazing. He's probably one of the tech CEOs who I really look up to. Um, I mean, I'm just happy, man, that you have done, so many things, um, and progress so massively over the years, right? Uh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah, I mean, I feel, all of these things really feel great in retrospect, but I feel like one thing that kept me going was, just not becoming complacent to, what you are doing is fine, and that kind of stuff. I always wanted to kind of do more, even now. But I think that whole streak was really helpful, which kept me going, and like just trying new things, and things just happened.
yeah, and like, 60 patents is like, not an easy thing to do. So yeah, I mean,
I never thought of
congrats
it.
on.
Yeah, I never thought of it. Yeah.
I'm
Thank
sure,
you. Thank you.
but like, congratulations on all the things you've achieved so far.
Yeah.
I
Thank you.
mean, you're being extremely humble about it, but it's no easy feat to do all these things, I'm sure.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree. It's not easy. It's just that, yeah, I also get, asked about like, how do you file patents? Honestly, the process is very reverse for me. I never think of ideas to file patents. It's just that, the processes that I talked about, they produce some outcomes which are like new in nature, some mechanics, some UI, some systems that are new in nature, and they become worthy enough to be patented, and then that's how it happens. It was never like, if I come up with a random unique idea that will be patented. That was never my process.
Yeah, and I think that's a great approach, right? Because if you think about it,
Yeah,
you're primarily trying to solve the problem, and you probably found a different way to solve it, and
yeah,
patent just happened to come along with it, right? But rather
that's
than,
true.
like, creating something new for the sake of a patent, but probably it could never be used also, right? So
That's true.
that's always there, and I'm glad you're taking that approach to solving your problems. But yeah, so I kind of have, like, probably like one last set of questions, which is, um so when I was, like, doing all the research about you, even before I reached out to you and everything, I saw that, you have a bunch of interviews, and one of the interviews which I came across, I think it was a written article or a blog post or something,
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
that really, uh, what can I say, got my attention, was like, this whole concept of being tool oriented versus being problem focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would really like it if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it actually comes from my like own personal, learning. I was a very tool centric person when I started my, career. Flash was a tool that I was like very deep into. I know this generation does not know what Flash is, but Flash used to be a software that actually, I would say, took the internet, by storm, because it was the thing that let you do some really amazing cool things, right? Like you could build apps for, devices. You could build websites that are like super interactive. Even the loaders of the website would be so interactive that you would love to wait and see the loaders itself, right? So it was as fascinating as I'm actually talking about. And when I first when I joined Adobe, my role was in the mobile team. I had to kind of, build applications that in Flash that would be used to test the product, right? Like, how do you break the product code that is getting built right now, right? Like using some of the APIs that are raw in nature, but you get the access to that in order to build, the app itself, and see where it breaks. And because of that, I also did a lot of like evangelism for like mobile products and mobile Flash. So I used to go to conferences and like universities to talk about what is the new version going to do for you. The developer communities was I was very deep into. Um, I built a lot of interesting applications even back then. Like I think one of that is even connected, like linked in my website. There's a demo video of that. It was not an iPhone; it was a Nokia, N75 phone. And when Apple really barred Flash from their devices, the whole industry shook, right? Like the whole industry was like, oh, what do we do now? And that's when I realized this whole thing that, oh, I'm actually in a position where I've got so deep into doing things with this one tool, which is Flash, and that has actually limited my ability to think like a problem solver, right? And that was also the time when I think the whole idea around interaction design and like designing products was coming up. And because before that it was more of like a heuristics checklist, or like, oh, my button is good enough, my text is looking good. So that was user experience back then. It was not as what it is today. So my transition from like that role into being a full-time designer was a transition where I had to actually, that transition I had to also go through in my head, where like being tool centric is going to be really, really challenging for me in order to become a problem solver. So how do you make yourself a tool agnostic person, and just like use tools to just shape or create these things that you are actually thinking about, and then it doesn't matter what tool you use. So just 2 years ago I was using Sketch every day, but now no one uses Sketch, like you use Figma every day. But I think, yeah, I've always not delved into like back in Adobe, like back in those days, I used to kind of delve into all types of tools, like how you can do this thing in After Effects, you can do this thing is freehand, and I would create I had a blog actually back in the days where I would create things, post it, and all of those things I used to do. But that whole 1 year, 2010, 11, kind of completely transformed me from like understanding like, oh, tools are like, I just need to kind of think about problems. Tools will come and go based on the technology, based on the companies and the businesses, and how things progress. Now Figma is doing amazing things, so I use that every day. But I just keep three tools in my arsenal, and that's like right now it's like Figma, Keynote, and Framer, right? These are the three tools. I don't delve into any other tool because it's just like I don't have time to kind of go and like learn and do new things. If it is required to kind of perform a job or perform a project, I would definitely kind of think about it. But as a designer, as a problem solver, I've not found a reason or a good excuse to kind of go and try something else. Yeah, if I get into maybe NFT someday, maybe then, but I don't foresee myself doing that anytime sooner. So yeah, I think that way, this whole idea of being a tool centric person versus a problem centric person changes you. Like I've seen people who kind of completely shift the approach from and actually do better, do things in a better way when that approach is shifted. Because when you're tool centric, you just like start thinking about solving a problem based on what this tool can only do. It's like, oh, I can actually create this sheet and I have this animation already available for me, so I'll just put it in a bottom sheet. But you'll not think about what are the other ways of doing that. Like, oh, when even if you think about another way of doing that, oh, it's very difficult to achieve with this tool, so I don't have like that ability to think of it in a more tool agnostic way. So I think, yeah, that was my point. I think I made in that interview, if I remember correctly. And back in India when I was there, again, I mean, I just don't want to comment on today's dynamics, but back in my days, it was like that. It was like, oh, I can do this thing in Photoshop. So, a visual designer would only design screens based on the wireframes that an interaction designer gives them. And like, they will make beautiful screens out of it. And what I really feel the biggest transition has happened is like, these are not silos anymore. An interaction designer need not just do wireframes in OmniGrapher, these kind of tools that was there back in the days. Um, they have to understand what aesthetics is. How do you beautifully aesthetically solve a problem, create UI mechanics to kind of solve a problem, right? So all types of people are merged into this one thing called a product designer, where they're like, oh, I understand pixels, I understand the product, I understand how the technology works, and I have to understand how the funnel would work. If I get a person from this screen, and will they tap on this to go here and versus do that? So in order to do that, my copy should be this way, I should choose the font this way, the button should have this language and all of that. So I think it's a very interesting convergence or unison of all these other different rules that we had used to have back in the days. And my point of view is, it was also fueled by the whole idea of being tool centric. Like, oh, I use OmniGrapher to do this, or I use Photoshop to do this. And the testing the ability of the tool was more into the conversation than, together looking at a problem and solving it together with whatever tool that is available.
I mean, this conversation just in general is just so eye-opening because I right now I'm just like reflecting upon how many decisions have I took because it is so
Hmm.
much more easier to just do this in the tool and it's not easy to do
Yeah,
something else, right? It's kind
yeah.
of insane, and I actually can relate to a lot of the things which you're saying because even though I started my job only last year, I have been
Hmm.
designing since 2016, and I have actually
Hmm.
seen that whole phase where UX designers used to use Photoshop to make UI
Hmm. Hmm.
and then I was introduced to Sketch and I learned
Yeah,
Sketch and suddenly we came across Figma and now everything's on Figma, right? Like I've seen
yeah,
that transition too, and it's so relatable, especially a lot of the things which Photoshop as a tool used to limit us. um
yeah.
so yeah, I can, I mean, the whole conversation in
No,
general, as I said, is very eye opening.
no, I'm glad. I mean, just on the topic of tools, right? I feel like if you think about the value props of each of these tools that they give you, right? I mean, when it was back in the days, Photoshop was not created for UI design, because UI design was not a thing when Photoshop came up,
Yeah,
right? Like, it was more of, you know photo editing, desktop publishing, and you have these
exactly.
frames and some, like, all of that. So it came up for that. And when UI design or product design started coming more into the limelight, people did not have better tools to do that, right? So they had freehand, was a tool that used to do help you do wireframes or whatever. And it was vector based, but Photoshop was like completely raster based, right? Uh, so Photoshop was not the tool, and that's why Sketch capitalized on that thing. And the value prop was like fast, and because Photoshop was slow, and it was not
Yeah,
doing the job properly. This was faster, it was vector, it was great. But then Figma came into the picture, like, oh, collaboration. People just miss collaboration, and we as human beings, we perform the best when we collaborate. So why don't we? Because Figma's value prop is not the pixels that they let you do.
yeah,
There were tools back in the days that they let you do the same thing. It is the collaboration. It is this, like, this floating mouses, and the web component of it, which just not which your product manager can open and comment in. And then they can also move the pixels if they want to. And that is the value prop of the product. So I feel like the whole evolution of tools has come from this. eh, of course, they went through this whole web 1, 2, and 3, whatever 3 version of that would be. But that transition themselves, where like you started doing it by yourself, and then you're like, oh, I can do it faster now. And then now it's like, oh, I can do it myself faster and with more people. So tada. So that's how things have evolved. So yeah.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all interesting how the landscape has changed so quickly
Yeah,
in so few years.
totally.
Cool. Anyways, we have actually pretty much reached the end of the episode, and I usually like to end my
Cool.
episodes with, like, as I mentioned when we spoke, I usually like to end my episodes with rapid fire questions. So we
Okay.
can, get started whenever you're ready.
Okay. And yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, great. The first question, your favorite project among all the ones you have worked on so far?
Okay. I would say stories. Not because it was not a project. It was an ecosystem that I got the opportunity to be a part of to build, and how we helped in changing the user behavior from sharing on the newsfeed to sharing on the stories, and like how that started new conversations. So that, yeah, that project is very close to my heart.
Right. So the next question actually has two parts. So the
Okay.
first part is, like, one designer you really look up to who you have worked with.
hmm Okay, so one designer I've worked with, I look up to. I feel, yeah, there are a bunch of them, but at this point, I would say Alex Cornell. You know, he used to work at Facebook for some time, and we got to cross paths. And the reason I really appreciated him was not like less because of his like execution skills, but the way he articulated things, he wrote things, he talked about things, and it just like brought so much clarity. Even though it was, let's say, even a small UI mechanic, a small change, he will articulate it in such a way that the team would just want to do it, and that is powerful, right? So that was something that I really appreciated, and appreciate the person and the designer both.
Great. So the second part is very simple. Like, one designer you really look up to, and it does not have to be someone, you work with or anything like that.
Honestly, at this point, if you ask me, um, I look up to this person who is not a designer. He's a marketing person. His name is Rory Sutherland, right? He is a managing director of Ogilvy, and I have read some of his books, and went through some of his podcasts and stocks. He's just mind blowing. His way of looking at things and problems, and way he frames it, and he talks about it, comes from a very different industry. He's an ad guru, but as an ads man, he has to actually sell a solution to a problem. The way he kind of goes through that process, just eye opening. He talks about this like psychological moonshots, and he talks about like how if you use data and science, or every other thing that we have in our arsenal, everything has a limit, right? Like you reach a saturation point, but when you start scratching the psychological aspects of your users and figure out like what is an interesting psychological solution that I can actually create that could solve the problem, and that he has numerous examples where he has you know solved problems that way, and I really look up to him.
Got it. Great. So I see, quite a few books in the background. So my next question is,
Haha.
of course, like, one book you would recommend. Does not have to be about design. One book which you just really like.
Bollywood. No, no, I'm just kidding. I feel I feel like you know it could be a cliche, but the amount of I would say a different layer of thinking that it made me do was the book called Sapiens, and just the idea of like understanding through our own backstories, like how we have
Mm.
evolved, and how simple things like collaboration, money, the idea of like food, or the wheel or the fire. Well, a lot of books have talked about it, but this book talks about it in a very interesting way, and I feel it was just like so interestingly you know eye opening, I would say, even though it was like, oh, it was obvious, I didn't know about it. And yeah, I would just give that series, the whole series by Yuval Noah Harari, a thumbs up for that question.
Great. So, okay, my last question. If you had, like, if you had to, like, worry about absolutely nothing, what is it
Huh.
that one thing you would be doing or working on right now? It can be design, it can be something else altogether.
Okay, so if I understood your question correctly, what would I do to not worry about anything in the future? Is that
No,
something?
if it's like if you cared about like nothing, if you had to care not about where you are or the money or
Hmm.
career, whatever, all the things that
Hmm.
usually put constraints, right?
Ha
What is
ha
it
ha ha.
that you would be probably working on, or was it what
Okay.
is it that you would be doing?
Yeah, I would be rather in the rainforests and taking pictures and like just like being more close to um, animals and herbs, especially. And that's my. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that, but that's my like one of those um, areas that I want to kind of work in, and maybe uh, write there. I do a bit of poetry, and just like most of the times it is around the context I'm in. I write stuff, and maybe I'm driving in the snow, not while driving, of course, like but but the feeling of it, or when I'm in the forest. I go for a lot of hikes because of that, just to kind of satiate my craving for getting into the jungles. But uh, I have some love for the jungles, especially rainforests. So yeah, I would possibly do something around that, and not worry about things if I did not worry about things. Yeah.
Great, great. I actually did not know that you're into photography and poetry also. It's really interesting
Yeah,
to
just
know.
like yeah, it's a passing hobbies, right? I mean, I remember back in the days, it was like getting a DSLR camera was such a thing of like, I am into photography now. But
Yeah.
honestly, over the years, that whole, I think it's a great format to, again, like people say, right, storytelling. And I feel like one thing that the cameras or the software can't do is the way compose your stuff. Like I don't believe in this like multi-composite shots or whatever. Yeah, they're good digital art, but when you really talk about photography, like how did you use your light or shadows or your subject in a way so that it kind of even tells a flowing story in a still that you have, right? So yeah, I mean that way it's a very fascinating thing that I feel I would love to keep doing whenever I get a chance. And yeah, poetry also it's very specific. It's like Hindi poetry, like a lot of it's a very niche audience. I know there's a lot of shero shairis that happen. I'm usually like not in the circles of doing that, but I just like write for myself. And if I'm inspired by a person, a conversation, a moment, a context that I'm in, I just just like pen down my emotions in a more rhythmic way, because I think poetry gives that like interesting limitation of keeping it in a rhythm with some like use of words, if words were the tools. And you are still in the constraints, and you're basically storing your emotions. And like how people capture moments with pictures, I feel like it's also important to capture thoughts. And usually people write journals. I usually go ahead and like put it down in a form of a poem. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because even I mean I got into design because of photography. I kind of started with
Nice.
photography and then learned for I mean I was able to relate to the part where Photoshop was meant for editing photos and stuff, because
Yeah,
that's kind of how
yeah,
I
yeah.
learned Photoshop. And but I also realized, okay, I could use it for few other things, and it's kind of how I got into
Right.
it. And then the whole Illustrator thing happened, and yeah, the as
Yeah.
you said, tools followed.
Yes, yes, yes. So there's a connection there now, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we have reached the end of the episode. I'm so glad we did
Cool,
this.
man.
It was a
Yeah.
brilliant conversation. It was slightly a different format that even I adopted this time for myself. I
Nice.
really enjoyed it. I had a wonderful time. I actually did not realize how the past an hour and a half or so went away.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but
Conversations are like that, right? I mean, I really enjoyed, talking as well. It's always good and refreshing talking about, stuff that you've done in the past, the thoughts you have in the present, and however we can go from here in the future, right? So that's fascinating to me as well. So all the best for everything. And I know, yeah, we are connected anyway. So reach out anytime, if you have questions or just want to kind of bounce an idea. I'm always happy to chat.
Yeah, so glad you came on the show. Thank you so much for doing
Yeah,
this, especially during your holidays. Uh,
no worries.
thank-
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was at home, so I was like, okay, let's do it. Yeah, I'm actually
Great.
traveling next week, so yeah. And that's why it was a good time to
Oh
do it
yeah,
now.
I'm great. I mean, I'm glad I caught you hold in the right time.
Yeah, you did.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Product Stories for more such episodes.